Chapter 1. The Promise. There was a time when the money in your pocket wasn't really money. It was a receipt, a paper backed by real gold, locked in a vault you would never see. You could hand it back, demand the gold it promised, and someone had to give it to you. All over the world, people trusted that promise without ever testing it. The paper was as good as gold. But a promise is only as real as the thing behind it. And the gold behind this one had quietly begun to disappear. Which left a question no one wanted to ask out loud. What happens to everyone's money when the promise beneath it can no longer be kept? Chapter 2. As good as gold. To understand how that promise was made, you have to go back to 1944, a quiet hotel in the mountains of New Hampshire, in the last year of the war. Most of the world lay in ruins. Cities were rubble, empires were collapsing, and the old money that ran on gold and gunpowder had broken down completely. So, delegates from 44 nations came to that one hotel with a single mission: to design from scratch the money the whole world would use next. Their plan was simple and enormous. Every currency on Earth would be tied to the American dollar, and the dollar would sit at the center of everything. To make that dollar trustworthy, they chained it to gold at a price fixed in stone. $35 bought 1 ounce, and that number was never meant to move. It was a beautiful idea. Any dollar, anywhere, could be carried into a vault and swapped for real gold. On paper, the dollar was as good as gold. For nearly 30 years, it held. And the world had never been so sure of its money. But hidden inside that perfect promise was a flaw, there from the very first day. Chapter 3. More paper than gold. Here was the flaw. The whole system only worked as long as the gold was actually sitting in the vault, enough of it to cover every dollar ever printed. But year after year, America printed more and more dollars to rebuild Europe, to fight the Cold War, to fund a war in Vietnam, and a boom back home. The dollars multiplied. The gold in the vaults barely moved. Slowly, the paper in the world grew far larger than the metal meant to back it. By the 1960s, there were far more dollars in existence than there was gold on Earth to redeem them. The promise had quietly become impossible to keep. The men who ran the system could see it in the numbers. Behind closed doors, they knew a plain and dangerous truth. The math simply did not work. If every country holding dollars showed up at once and demanded gold, the vault would run dry long before the line ran out. There wasn't enough, not close. So everyone made a quiet, unspoken deal. Nobody would test it. The promise survived only as long as no one asked, until someone did. Chapter 4. The Quiet Run. Then in 1965, one man decided to test it. The president of France stood up and said, out loud, what everyone else had only whispered. France would no longer sit quietly on its American dollars. It would send them back across the Atlantic and demand in return solid American gold. France even sent a warship across the ocean to carry its gold home. To the French, paper promises were no longer enough. Only the metal itself would do. And France was not alone. Quietly, one government after another began doing the same, lining up to trade their dollars for gold before the metal ran out. Ship by ship, vault by vault, the gold that backed the world's money began to drain out of America. With every passing year, the stacks of gold behind the glass grew thinner, and the empty shelves behind them stretched longer and darker. And here was the cruel twist. Every honest nation that cashed its dollars for gold made the promise weaker for everyone who still held on. The more nations trusted the promise enough to actually collect on it, the faster that promise fell apart. Honesty itself was draining the vault. By the end of the 1960s, this was no longer a worry for some distant future. More than half the gold was already gone. Chapter 5. Everyone was tied in. Stop for a moment and see just how strange this had become. Every country on Earth had tied the value of its money to one promise, made by one nation, a promise almost none of them could ever check. Because almost no one was ever allowed inside the vault, the world simply had to take America's word that the gold behind the dollar was really there. So they trusted. They built their savings, their trade, their whole economies on that trust, because the alternative was simply too frightening to picture. But a quiet question sat underneath all of it. What if, one day, the world came to collect, and the gold simply wasn't there? By 1971, that was no longer some distant fear. The vault was nearly empty, and the day of reckoning was only weeks away. And the handful of men who ran the system knew it better than anyone. They could hear the clock quietly running out. Chapter 6. They swore it was safe. In public, the message from Washington never wavered. Officials stood at their podiums and swore over and over that the dollar was rock solid. They faced the cameras and promised, again and again, that the link between the dollar and gold would never ever be broken. But behind closed doors, those very same men were quietly panicking. The vault was nearly bare, and the promise was slipping out of their hands. And the demands kept coming. In August 1971, Britain asked to trade in its dollars for $3 billion worth of American gold. Under the old rules, it was a perfectly routine request, but there was simply no longer enough gold left in the vault to say yes. The whole system was now days from breaking, and the men in charge finally saw their choice: keep waiting for the collapse, or get ahead of it. Chapter 7. The men who wouldn't wait. So a small group of men made a bold and secret decision. They would not wait for the world to break the promise. They would break it themselves first. At the center stood the Treasury Secretary, a big, blunt Texan who was not afraid of a fight and not afraid of the rest of the world. His attitude would become famous. The dollar, he believed, was America's currency, but its problems from now on were everyone else's. Not everyone in the room agreed. Some warned it could shake the world economy to its core, but the loudest, most certain voices wanted to act, and act now. That Friday in August, they took the president up to a secret mountain retreat. The meeting was hidden from the world. No announcement, no reporters, no leaks. The heavy doors closed, and for 3 long days they stayed closed. Inside, they argued over the fate of the world's money, how to break a 50-year-old promise without setting off a global panic. And on the 3rd day, a Sunday, behind those closed doors, they finally made their choice. Chapter 8. Camp David. That Sunday night, the president sat down in front of the television cameras to tell the country and the world exactly what they had decided. He was actually worried about the timing, about interrupting the nation's favorite Sunday evening shows and annoying millions of viewers at home. But But his advisors insisted it had to be that night, before the markets on the far side of the world opened on Monday morning. And so, in a televised speech barely 20 minutes long, he calmly announced a decision that would change money for everyone, everywhere, forever. He said that America would temporarily close the gold window, that from now on, the dollar could no longer be turned in for gold. And that was it. The window to the gold swung shut, and it would never open again. In the same breath, he slapped a heavy tax on foreign goods and froze wages and prices at home. To the rest of the world, it landed like a shock. The word he used was temporary. It was meant to be a pause, a short breathing space. It never, ever came back. In a single evening, the dollar stopped being a promise you could collect, and quietly became just paper. When the world's markets opened the next morning, currencies lurched, traders scrambled, and the ground under global money shifted for good. And by the time the Sunday shows came back on, the whole world had woken to money that was worth only what people believed it was worth. Chapter 9. What money really is. So what really happened that Sunday night in 1971? A promise had become too expensive to keep, so the people who made it did the simplest, most powerful thing of all. They quietly rewrote the rules. And here's the part that still touches your life. You are living right now, inside the rules they wrote that night. Every time you earn, spend, or save. Every note in your wallet, every number in your account is worth something for one reason only, because everyone agrees that it is. That is the real lesson of leverage. When the people who write the rules are about to lose under them, they don't break the rules. They rewrite them, and you keep playing. The players change. The gold, the currencies, the names, those change too. But the rule underneath them never does. It simply gets rewritten. This is Leverage, where we break down the hidden stories behind money, power, and the systems that quietly run the world. If topics like this interest you, consider subscribing so you never miss a single video. And if you enjoyed it, like, share, and comment down below your favorite part. Thank you for watching.